Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have back on Abdul El-Sayed. He's a doctor. He served on President Biden's Unity Task Force for Healthcare. He's author of the book Medicare for All, I think which you talked about on our show a while back. He ran for governor of Michigan in the past, and now he's running for the United States Senate in Michigan for the Democratic nomination. He's already been endorsed by Bernie Sanders. Abdul, good to see you.
Dean, it is always a privilege to join you. Thank you so much for having
It's
me.
great to have you. I always feel an affinity to you because my father's name was Abdul. So I'm always like, whatever there's an Abdul, gotta like him.
We got to
Like,
stick together. I was
exactly.
proud that a guy named Abdul went third in the NFL draft this year.
Oh my,
So
yeah,
all the
and
Abduls,
yeah, and he's coming to the
wrong
Giants.
school, but I'll take it. So
My team, the Giants. I'm very excited about it. This guy's a monster. It's going to be
he is.
very good. So let's talk about. I mean, you are a doctor. You're a medical doctor. You've practiced. You've worked in the Wayne County as a health director, but now you're again trying to do public service in a different way. What about running for office so inspires you and entices you?
Dean, when you train in medicine, you're taught to ask two questions: what's wrong, and how can I help? And as I asked those questions when I was in medical school, I came to appreciate that too often what was wrong wasn't something I had learned to address in medical school, had a lot more to do with what was happening outside of a clinic or a hospital. The challenges that left somebody without good food to eat, or clean water, or clean air to breathe, a job that left them on the ragged edge of the economy, unable to afford groceries. Those are the challenges that I realized. And then those are the people that got to come into a clinic or a hospital in the first place. And as I was training, I came to appreciate that so much of the healthcare model is built around keeping people out. So I'm running because I believe that it just shouldn't be this hard to get by in the richest, most powerful country in the world. And in the last 10 years of my public service, I've been engaged in a conversation with Michiganders, and they've been telling me about the pain that they're experiencing. And I realized that if we're willing to step up to the powers that be that have exploited that pain to come to power to make it worse in the form of trucking our global economy so you could pass stock tips to your billionaire buddies, or gutting the best things about American government like cancer research funding, or it's empowering somebody like Elon Musk to just gut government for the sake of gutting government. All of those things people recognize are not making the problem any better. It's just making it worse. But to beat those folks, you have to acknowledge the pain that people are experiencing, and you've got to be fighting for something more. And I've known what I'm fighting for my entire career. I want everybody in this country to have guaranteed health care. I want an economy that doesn't work for the Fortune 500, but that empowers all 350 million of us in this country to have our own little fortunes, that works for working people, where one job is enough to be able to afford taking care of your family. An economy where we have housing that young people can believe that someday they might even be able to own. An economy where our education system isn't predicated on folks being, in effect, locked out of higher education, but instead where you can achieve the highest level of education you can do.
Mhm.
Those are the kinds of things that we need and deserve in this country. And right now, we can't have them. And we can't have them in large part because the political disease in our society is one where corporations, billionaires, oligarchs, they found ways to buy politicians, to buy out our politics, and to deliver government services for themselves, but not for the rest of us. We can do so much better. My work has been about doing exactly that, and I'm running now because it is an extension of that public service that I began in my career about 10 years ago.
So, the issues you talk about are so vitally important. And to change them, we have to combat big money in politics, what you're talking about. It is the most corrosive force. It's legal. In the old days, it would be a bag of money. Now it's $1 million to a super PAC instead. And we've talked about it a lot. We may have talked about it together. I've talked to Senator Sanders. I've talked to Democrats, not even as progressive Senator Sanders, going, we got to get big money out of politics. How would we do this? Like, if you're a senator, what would you do about it?
Dean, I'll tell you this: we need to take on Citizens United. It's a matter of legislation. The problem, though, is that too many folks on both sides of the aisle, Republicans certainly, but also too many Democrats, have been playing by that set of rules where corporations can write them a fat PAC check, and they get elected. And then when that corporation wants to move legislation that would hurt the very people who those folks asked for votes, too often they are willing to bend over backwards to accommodate the corporation. You see it in the messaging. of folks across the aisle, right? Whether it's Republicans, certainly, who
Mhm.
shamefacedly will do the work of corporations, but too many Democrats who want to triangulate and find a message that's perfectly inoffensive to everyone, including their corporate donors, so that they're saying nothing at all, but saying it with a lot of enthusiasm. And so, if we're serious about this, we need legislation that is going to undo the terrible consequences of Citizens United. And let's be clear what that did. It tried to interpret the Constitution to say that corporations are people, which they are not. Right? A corporation can't tell you about its favorite bedtime story when it was a kid or who its first crush was.
Right.
And it interpreted their money as speech. And when you do that, you create a situation where you can corrupt our political system. And we're seeing the downstream consequences of that every single day in public policy that delivers for big corporations and their stockholders and their CEOs, but not for the rest of us. We could do better, but we've got to stand up to it. So I really appreciate you starting on that point.
It's to me, everything flows from that. And then gerrymandering for congressional races, but that's a different story. Big money in politics prevents so much. You see public opinion on an issue, and you're like, why can't we enact like universal background checks for guns? Like the easiest thing, 90%, because big money in politics scares enough people not to want to do that. Issues on healthcare, paid family leave, expanding Medicare to provide vision, dental, and hearing. 90% say yeah. Still, it was stopped, even though Democrats had control, and that was Manchin and Sinema did that. Chatting with Abdul El-Sayed, a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. It's an open seat there. Senator Gary Peters has chosen not to run for re-election. So tell us a little bit about the economy in Michigan. It's such a bellwether state. Obviously, Trump was there for the 100th day, but the tariffs, I know for some of the automotive industry, some strategic tariffs might be helpful, but this broad-based one seems to be stifling to the economy. But I'm curious, what are you seeing in Michigan?
Dean, just to pick up on your last point, whenever there's public consensus on one point and then political consensus, meaning both parties agree entirely opposite to what the public agrees, the difference is somebody's money. And so I
Yep.
really
Yep.
encourage folks always to follow the money. Who is trying to buy access to politicians and, in effect, buy their mouths from them? And how is it corrupting our public discussion and what politicians can deliver for us? But you asked a really important question about the economy. No
Yeah.
matter where I go in the state of Michigan, for the past 10 years as a public servant, people want two things out of their economy. They want an economy that works for working people. So if you're putting your time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears into your work, that you make enough and you have security enough to know that you can take care of your family. We shouldn't have to have, two, three jobs in a family just to be able to take care of your kids. The other is that people want to be able to start and build and grow small businesses. But we don't have that. And we don't have that for really one reason, because our economy works for really, really big corporations and the people who run them. And that is entirely because of the money we talked about before.
Yep.
But you asked a question also about tariffs. And look, I think it's really important for us to recognize that the trade deals that we saw over the past several decades, they have fundamentally destroyed whole communities in states like mine. NAFTA, TPP, these were devastating for people. And I remember my parents worked in Flint, and I remember when the Buick plant in Flint closed back in 1999 and what the consequences meant for Flint. And we saw that erosion over time leading all the way up to that terrible water crisis. This is a problem that needs a solution. We should be able to build and engage in advanced manufacturing for the sectors of tomorrow. So the way I think about this is kind of like cancer, right? If trade deals are like a cancer, one way to take on the cancer is through chemotherapy. But the thing about chemotherapy is every doctor will tell you if you give the patient all the chemotherapy at once, you will kill your patient, right? Because chemotherapy is,
Okay.
is poisonous.
Sure.
But if you're really smart about how you dole it out and you're very tactical and strategic, you can kill the cancer and save the patient, right? That's not what Donald Trump did, because Donald Trump, everything he does is characterized in a couple of different ways. It's always chaotic, it's always ham-handed, and it's always self-serving, which is exactly what happened here. Now, if you were serious about using tariffs to bring back advanced manufacturing to a place like Michigan, what you would do is you would invest strategically in the industries of tomorrow. You would make sure that labor was at the table as you made these investments to make sure that it wasn't just a business you were starting, but businesses that created great jobs for folks in the local community. And then you would very surgically and strategically tariff to protect those particular industries over time. You would make sure everybody understood that you were doing it, why you were doing it, and how it was going to shift. And as those industries got their sea legs, you would start to strategically pull those tariffs back. That's not what happened here, clearly, because Donald Trump, I think, understands that there's a word called tariffs that gives him leverage over corporate CEOs, which is exactly what he want and what he got. But that's not about bringing back domestic manufacturing. That's about currying favor for Donald Trump. And I want folks to understand the difference here.
Absolutely. Because if there was a plan, if he really had a plan, Abdul, he would say, in a year from now, we're going to create these many jobs in this field. And in 2 years from now, here. And in 5 years from now, here. And there's going to be a little bit of pain, but I can tell you, we're going to see these little markers. You're going to give me and give me a chance to do this. And we're going to do it together with tax policy and subsidies, whatever. None of that. It's like whimsical day by day by day. And his new thing is today to blame Joe Biden for everything bad in the economy, even promising for the future. And he goes today at the cabinet meeting, if the next quarter is bad, I'm going to blame Biden for that as well. I don't know who falls for this, but someone does, I guess, because he keeps saying this stuff. It's incompetence at the worst time to have incompetence. We're going to a tough economic time. Already it was going a little bit of a slowdown. The tariffs are just grinded us to a halt. So, Michigan is an important state there. There was one thing, by the way, I just want to get your reaction. At the rally last night in Michigan, Donald Trump showed images to the crowd of the migrants being taken off the plane in El Salvador and being roughed up and being held down and shaved and being walked almost like a dog. And the crowd cheered. And to me, that was the most bone chilling. They cheered and they began cheering USA. And we talk about with Trump, there's this celebration of cruelty, but that was literally a celebration of cruelty. What's your reaction to that happening in your own state?
I find it disgusting and disheartening. And at the same time, I was raised to try and find empathy for even the worst things that people might do or cheer for. And I think what Trump has been able to do is he has been able to take a level of pain that people are experiencing and have been experiencing now for decades in our
Mm-hmm.
country and forge it into a kind of cynicism that tells people that if somebody else is hurting worse than them, then it's not as bad for them. And I just want us to pick apart that logic for a minute. When those folks go home, it's not like their lives got any easier. In fact, they've just gotten worse because of the last 100 days. You think about the impact that these tariffs are going to have on the economy here in Michigan, the number of people who are going to lose their jobs, the number of people who are going to lose their health care because they've lost those jobs. You think about all of the federal workers in and around Michigan who've lost their jobs as a function of what they call cost cutting for waste, fraud, and abuse, which seems to be kind of wasteful, fraudulent, and abusive when you think about who's doing it.
Right.
And that's Elon Musk, who's literally the richest person in the world. They're not going to be any better off. And so to me, I understand and I want folks to feel better. I want to heal that pain. But but trying to demagogue people who our country, frankly, is running roughshod over, is violating their constitutional rights, that doesn't make us any safer. It doesn't make us feel any better. So my ask to Michiganders, the very same people who might have been at that rally, is to ask yourself, what does it mean to actually come together to try and heal that pain? I understand that the economy has left you feeling insecure. I understand that we have failed to provide you healthcare. I understand why you worry about whether or not your kid is going to be able to actually compete in the economy of tomorrow, given that the kid's school is crumbling. And I wonder, what is it that we do to actually solve those problems together, right? When we started this interview, you asked me, how do you go from medicine to politics? And I told you that the two central questions were, what's wrong and how can I help? And
Right.
I understand that people are saying it really hurts. But you know what Trump's not asking? Is how can I help? He's asking, how can I exploit your pain to get power for myself, to make it really, really worse on other people so that you fear me enough to stop questioning me? That's the Trump logic. And we could do so much better. And that's my ask to Michiganders.
It's a very compassionate, nuanced response, and you can tell you're a doctor with compassion. I'm sure you're very good to the patients. I'm chatting with Abdul El-Sayed, and I agree with you. There are people whose lives, no fault of their own, has not been as they've dreamed, and I get that. And sometimes it's easier for someone on the outside to blame a stranger, someone who doesn't look like them, for trying to really address the real fundamental problems, which aren't easy to address often. It really is infrastructure problems, education system. It could be a property tax system, whatever it might be. I want to touch on something else you raised in the beginning, which is housing. What I found so interesting about housing is when I have members of Congress on, and I've had over the years, at the end, I always say, what are issues that people are raising to you that are not getting press? The number one issue across the country was housing. And I'm like, wow. And they felt, as a member of Congress, what can they do? But they're hearing this over and over. Now it's become a bigger issue, and it's slowing down the milestones of a younger generation, and some people of different ages just may have given up on owning a home. So, as a senator, as a member of the U.S. Senate, what will you do in terms of housing?
Housing is fundamental to our lives. If you don't have a stable place to call home, if you can't count on that place, to put your stuff to come home to every night, to raise your kids in, then it's really, really hard to imagine a future. One issue that Trump seems to all of a sudden care about is the number of babies that people are having. But like, how do you build a family when you can't even believe that you have a stable home for them? Right. So he's talking about giving people $5,000 to have a baby. Okay, it's going to cost a lot more than $5,000 to afford childcare, to afford your mortgage, to make sure that you can pay for that kid's education. Like, these things are really expensive in America right now. And housing is it really is the capstone of that. So I think most importantly, we just have to build more homes, right? There just are not enough homes. And there are a number of challenges there. One of them is you've got a whole lot of corporate consolidation in the development space and in communities. And so they're able to collude to increase the price of home building. Another part of that, though, is also that you've got certain zoning and regulations in local communities that make it harder to build. But then a third part of that is, well, affordability in other parts of people's lives is a real challenge. And so folks who even might consider being able to buy a home at some point, look at inflation and what it's eating up in their in the rest of their budget and say, maybe I actually can't even start to save for this. You think about folks who are saddled down by different kinds of debt. I mean, medical debt, $225 billion in medical debt. That's more than the GDP of half of the US states, right? When you've got that much debt, the idea that you're going to be able to take on more debt and potentially buy a home, that becomes so far off for you. And so that affordability crisis compounds on itself, and it hits hardest when it comes to the single biggest bill that we all have to pay, which tends to be our rent or our mortgage. And so we can do so much better. And the last point I want to make here is that there are really important organizations that are organizing, particularly for renters. When you think about tenants unions and others who are working to try and bring down the cost of rent overall. But the big picture we all have to think about is we just need more housing. We,
Yep.
in the richest, most powerful country in the world, should be able to address this problem. And as senator, I'm looking at legislation that will expand the capacity to build high quality, affordable housing for folks across our country. And I hope that every single Michigander, every single American who's looking at their future says, home ownership is within reach for me. And I know I can use that as a stable foundation for my future.
And I can tell you this firsthand, and speaking to the candidates for governor of New Jersey and the candidates for mayor of New York City, they would love to have a federal partner. They all talk about housing. Oh my gosh, that is New Jersey, New York City. Housing is the top issue that when they come on, we talk about it. Everyone has a plan for housing. Having a federal partnership, because yes, well, you mentioned local zoning laws as a federal office holder, it's really going to be difficult to impact that, but the governor could, or the local officials can, and having the funding from the federal government can make these dreams come true. So I can really see that as a partnership. In the last couple of minutes, I'm chatting again with Abdul El-Sayed. He's running for Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in the beautiful state of Michigan. You were endorsed by Bernie Sanders. Well, I like Senator Sanders a lot. He comes on, we joke. Last time he was on, I'm like, you were right. You predicted the oligarchy. It's here. How do you feel? And he's laughing because I knew it was coming. So how important is it to you to get his endorsement?
Is huge. Look, aside from being a mentor and a friend, Senator Sanders has spent the better part of his life, like since before I was even born, fighting on a very simple set of values that are resonating now more than ever, which is that our economy should work for workers, which is that you should be guaranteed health insurance from the cradle to grave, that from the cradle to the grave,
Yeah.
that's not provided to you by some corporation whose CEO makes tens of millions of dollars a year, that we should be protecting our air and our water, that we should be respecting one another and living in community with one another, that the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts. I mean, he's been fighting on these values for years. There's a reason that he and AOC are pulling tens of thousands of people into rooms. I got to speak at the Fighting the Oligarchy tour when he came to Warren. I got to tell you, seeing people lining outside the door in Warren, Michigan, right, which is the heart of Macomb County, which is represented by a Republican, tells you something about the resonance of his message. And I hope that folks understand that in this race, we are picking up those same themes and talking about them honestly and clearly. And one of the things that Senator Sanders and I share is we don't take corporate money, right? Which means that we're allowed, right? We're allowed to say the things that other Democrats, a lot of other Democrats and certainly Republicans don't say. Like when we say Medicare for all, we say it because we're not taking corporate PAC contributions from the very same insurance companies that that tell all the other folks that they can't actually say that. When we say that maybe instead of sending our money to foreign militaries abroad to bomb other people's children and their schools, maybe we should be spending that money here on our schools. We can say that because we're not worried about what MAGA money is going to come into our race to support us to beat up other Democrats. So, I feel like these values are common sense, right? These are the things that Democrats should be about. We should not be the party of war. We should not be the party of corporate interests. We should be the party of healthcare and workers and housing and clean air and clean water. And that's what Senator Sanders has been preaching now for decades. And I'm really grateful that he sees in this race the opportunity to continue forward on that legacy here in Michigan.
And very last thing, if people want to find out more about the campaign, what's the website? And you want to touch on, I know you have big events this weekend, Detroit, Flint, and Grand Rapids.
That's right. So abdulforsenate.com. I hope that folks will come out. We've got launch rallies in Detroit, 3 o'clock, May 3rd, in Grand Rapids, which will be 5 o'clock, May 4th, and then Flint, which will be on that Saturday at 5 o'clock. Go on over to our website. You can sign up to attend. And then, look, I don't take corporate PAC money, so I rely on good folks like you. So even if you can chip us $5, $10, I know the economy is a little bit rough. We're trying to do something about that. So I hope that you see that investment as being one into an economy where working people can thrive.
Well, Abdul, it was great catching up with you and talking to you here. And I look forward to continuing this as a conversation between now and your primary, which is next year. And again, abdulforsenate.com is the website. Best of luck, brother. I look forward to chatting with you in the future. Inshallah, God willing, we'll be chatting more.
Appreciate you, Dean. Thank you so much for having me.